Revolution. A new royal family. Intrigues and murder. This is the story of the women who found themselves in the midst of the Vasa Dynasty's turbulent family feud. In this first part, we get to know the three women who became the Vasa Dynasty's very first queens. In the beginning of the 16th century, Sweden was a part of the Kalmar Union, the union between Sweden, Norway and Denmark, made by Queen Margareta at the end of the 14th century. The king at this time was Christian II, who lived in Denmark. Many of the Swedish noblemen was dissatisfied with Christian and with the union, and rebellion broke out. Unfortunately for them, Christian won the war and took his revenge on the rebel leaders among the nobles by executing them in what is remembered as the Stockholm bloodbath. From the ashes of this catastrophe, a certain Gustav Eriksson Vasa arose. He gathered an army and continued the Revolutionary War. This in itself is a long story, which might be told at another time. For now, it is enough to know that Gustav Vasa was victorious and could proclaim himself King of Sweden in 1523. Gustav Vasa had no legitimate claim to the throne. He was admittedly from one of the most powerful noble families in Sweden, but he had no royal blood. Therefore, he was seen by many as an upstart and an usurper who had taken the throne from the rightful king. He had to spend many years defending his position. And one of the things a true king needs is a queen. Gustav preferably wanted to marry a princess who could help him strengthen his claim. And this is where our story really begins. It was not easy for Gustav to find a wife, but eventually he got lucky with the little dukedom of Sachsen-Lauenburg. Despite being a small dukedom, it had existed for 300 years, and the dynasty was related to many powerful families in Europe. They were also Protestant, which suited Gustav perfectly since he just carried out the Protestant Reformation in Sweden. The bride-to-be was named Katarina, and she was 15 when the marriage negotiations began. She had yet another advantage to make her appealing as a wife to a Swedish king with contested rights to the throne. She descended on both her mother and father's side from an old Swedish royal line, the Bjälbo family. So, who was Katarina? She was born on the 24th of September 1513, daughter of Duke Magnus I of Sachsen-Lauenburg and Katarina of Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel. We know very little of her early life, except that she was raised in the Protestant faith and that she had 5 siblings. Her older sister, Dorothea, was married to the new King of Denmark, Christian III. We don't know how Katarina looked either, since there are no portraits left of her. What is left is the effigy on her tomb. In the summer of 1531, Gustav Vasa sent the most magnificent ships he could find to Lübeck, where Katarina and her mother was picked up to sail to her new homeland. She was then 17 years old. Gustav was 35. We can assume that Katarina was not very impressed by Stockholm, which at this time was a small city with about 10,000 inhabitants, many of which lived in small cottages. Pigs and cows was crowded with the people, and the city stank of garbage. Her new home was to be the Castle of 3 Crowns, a quite outdated and draughty castle. The wedding was held on Katarina's 18th birthday, the 24th of September 1531. This was celebrated with pomp and pageantry. It was important to show off the royal family's riches and power to strengthen Gustav's status as king. Katarina was crowned queen the same day, and the celebrations lasted for a week. Then Katarina's new life began. It is said that she was unhappy, but we don't really know. What we do know is that the king was often absent to put down the various uprisings that plagued Gustav's reign. He had a terrible temper and was probably not that easy to deal with. Moreover, Katarina did not speak any Swedish, and Gustav did not speak German that well, so they probably couldn't have any deeper conversations. Katarina has been described as both melancholic and capricious. She probably felt lonely and frustrated. Besides that, almost no stories about Katarina have survived. But she did her main duty as queen. She gave birth to a son, the future Erik XIV. The birth has been described as long and difficult. According to one source, an astrologer called to read the future in the stars bade the lords and ladies waiting outside Katarina's chamber to pray that the birth was to be postponed a little bit longer, since if the child was born at that hour, he would become a grief to the country. But it was too late, and at that moment the newborn's cries could be heard from the chamber. This is probably just a tale though, since it was written after Erik XIV's fall much later. And despite bad omens in the skies, according to one chronicler, the whole country was filled with mirth and joy. Gustav Vasa himself must have been very pleased. He now had an heir, and the Vasa Dynasty was founded. He would later make sure that Sweden became an hereditary kingdom, where the crown was to be inherited from father to eldest son. But the family bliss would not last. In September 1535, Katarina's sister Dorothea and her husband, King Christian III of Denmark, was visiting, and this was celebrated with feasts and dancing. In fact, the dancing was so wild that Katarina fell and hurt herself so badly that she later died, the day before her 22nd birthday, probably due to a miscarriage caused by the fall. Rumors spread that Katarina has warned Christian III about Gustav Vasa, which made him so angry that he beat her to death with a hammer. Katarina was buried in Uppsala Cathedral, and when the grave much later was exhumed and her skeleton examined, there was no sign of violence. Most likely, the rumors were spread by Gustav's enemies, meant to discredit the king. If Gustav mourned Katarina, we don't know, but after only a year he remarried. Not with a foreign princess this time, but with a young woman from one of the most prominent noble families in Sweden, Margareta Eriksdotter Leijonhufvud. Through this marriage, Gustav wanted to tie the powerful noble families to him and create family ties and loyalties. Margareta was born on the 1st of January 1516. Her father was Erik Abrahamsson Leijonhufvud, and her mother, who was named Ebba Eriksdotter Vasa, was a second cousin to the king. When Margareta was just 4 years old, her father was beheaded in Stockholm bloodbath. Despite this, her mother Ebba was allowed to keep the family's estates and properties. We can assume that Margareta was raised in the same way as other noble girls at this time, which meant that she was taught to run a large household, manage the economy, read, write, and count. She was probably a lady-in-waiting to Gustav Vasa's first wife, Katarina. Maybe she caught the king's eyes then? It is said that she was secretly engaged with a young noble called Svante Sture, but when the king decided to marry her, Svante had to settle with her sister Märta instead. According to legend, Margareta hid in a coffin in the attic when Gustav came to propose. But this is not very likely to be true, since this would be an insult to the king, who you did not want to offend. Besides, girls at this time was raised to obey their families and to make advantageous marriages. So no matter what she wanted, Margareta had no choice. The wedding was held on the 1st of October 1536, on the 1-year anniversary of the late queen's funeral. A week later, Margareta was crowned Queen of Sweden. The marriage between the royal couple has been described as a happy one. They worked together to strengthen the power of the king, keep good relations with the nobility, and to stabilize the country. In preserved letters, you can read that many turned to Margareta, asking her to put in a word for them with the king. Often, when the king granted a request, he let them know it was for the sake of our dear wife, Queen Margareta's prayers. Margareta is described to be kind, patient, and diplomatic, which made her able to influence the otherwise hot-headed king. She was a practical woman and took care of the maintenance of the castle, as well as the crown's and her own properties. She ruled over the servants, took care of the household's finances, and looked after the children. And she had a lot of children. Just a few months after the wedding, Margareta got pregnant with the future Johan III, and after that she was more or less constantly pregnant. In 15 years, she gave birth to 10 children, of which 8 survived to adulthood. 2 of her sons would be kings of Sweden, Johan III and Karl IX. But constant pregnancies and births takes its toll, and at the end of her life, Margareta's health declined. In the summer of 1551, when the Vasa family was sailing the Lake of Mälaren, she fell ill and had to go to shore at the castle of Tynnelse. According to a contemporary source, at her deathbed, she thanked her husband for elevating her to be queen, and for the strong heirs they have produced together. She died on August 26, 35 years old. Margareta is described by her contemporaries as the perfect wife, queen, and mother. She was fertile, loyal, humble, and wise. Sources tells us that Gustav Vasa took her death very hard, and that he never was as happy again as he was with her. However, Gustav had not married for the last time. He was now 55 years old, a respectable age at that time, and it showed. He had a chronic inflammation in one leg, and the few teeth he had left were inflamed. He must have been in constant pain, which did not make his already foul temper better. But it was not good for a man to be without a wife, not even for a king. Therefore, he began searching for a new wife and queen, and the choice fell upon the 16-year-old Katarina Gustavsdotter Stenbock, which caused quite a scandal. Not because she was so much younger, but because they were closely related. It happened to be that Katarina's mother Britta was the king's late wife Margareta's sister. Katarina and the king's children was thus cousins. Many saw this as heresy and against the law of God. Gustav Vasa summoned a church council to settle the affair. All the bishops except one was against the match. But Gustav only needed one bishop to be married, and so the wedding went ahead. Just as with Margareta, there is stories that Katarina ran and hid when the king came to propose. This is probably not true, but we can guess that she was not thrilled to marry an old and sick man. But just as her aunt, she had no choice, and the very expensive wedding was celebrated on August 22nd, 1552, and the next day Katarina was crowned as queen. From preserved letters from Katarina to her mother, we can guess that the marriage wasn't that happy. Gustav probably wasn't satisfied either, since he forbade priests to wed people with great age difference. Katarina is described as generous and caring. She never had any children of her own, but she took care of her stepchildren and came to mediate between them in the future. She also gave money and protection to orphans and widows during the hostilities between her stepsons. For this work, she was called the Mother of the Nation. Besides this, not much is known about Katarina's deeds as queen. However, it is known that at the end of Gustav's life, when he was very ill, Katarina was constantly by his side. She took such care of him that she herself got sick. Then she asked that her sickbed was to be moved into the same room as the king, so she could still watch over him. When Gustav Vasa died on September 29, 1560, she declared that she would never again be happy. Katarina was now 25 and dowager queen. Despite being so young, she never remarried. She moved to her castle in Strömsholm. Katarina had good income from her counties and estates and was seen as a good landlord. On several occasions, she lent large sums of money to her stepchildren. She survived them all and died on September 13th, 1621. She had then been Dowager Queen for 61 years, longer than anyone in Swedish history. Next time, we will meet 3 women who were drawn into the bloody battles between the sons of Gustav Vasa after his death: a poor girl, a Polish princess, and a reluctant bride.